The doctor looked at me and said, "I need a few minutes alone with your son." I frowned. "Why? Kyle's only 6 years old. Don't you need me around?" I asked, immediately worried. "Yes, but I need to conduct a private developmental assessment, doctor." Kelly's tone was calm, too calm. I hesitated. "A what?" "He's never needed one before. It's just standard for his age group." "New protocols," she said. I wanted to argue, but before I could, she was already opening the door and gesturing me out. I stepped into the hallway, unsure if I should push back, but it's not like you can really argue with a doctor. Still, something didn't feel right. I stayed just outside the door, listening. Her questions made my stomach twist. "Are you happy at home? Has anyone ever laid hands on you? Do mommy and daddy fight a lot?" My heart started pounding. Was she building a CPS case against me? I tried to remember if anything could have looked suspicious. Kyle scraped his knee last week at the playground. Could that be it? My mind spun through every possible scenario where someone might think we were bad parents. When Dr. Kelly finally opened the door, she smiled like nothing was wrong, all done. "I'd like to schedule a follow-up in 2 weeks." "A follow-up?" I asked, panic creeping in. This was just a routine checkup, right? "He's healthy. I just want to double-check something," she said vaguely. I couldn't shake the unease. 2 weeks later, I insisted on staying in the room. Her smile faltered. "The assessment works better when it's just me and Kyle," she argued. "I'm not leaving," I told her. She nodded stiffly and sat down on her stool. From her bag, she pulled out a small wrapped gift. Kyle's eyes lit up when he tore it open, a Spider-Man coloring book with a full set of markers. She flipped the book open and started asking him questions that didn't feel medical at all. "What's your daily routine, Kyle? When do you wake up? When do you go to bed? Are you usually home? Does anyone else live with you?" I stepped closer. "Why do you need to know his schedule, Doctor?" Kelly froze, then smiled awkwardly. "Just being thorough. Building rapport is important. But we can stop here. I'd still like another follow-up. Actually, if it's easier, I could come to your home." That's when I knew something was off. Pediatricians don't make house calls, not like that. "No," I said sharply. "We'll find a new doctor." I grabbed Kyle and left the clinic. But things didn't end there. Kelly started calling every day, leaving frantic voicemails, each one stranger than the last. I blocked her number, hoping that would be the end of it. 3 weeks later, she showed up at our house. Through the peephole, I saw her in her white coat, smiling too wide, holding a big present. "Hello," she called softly. "I have something for Kyle." I opened the main door but kept the screen locked. Kyle came running, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Wow. Hi, Dr. Kelly." "Presents," he yelled. She crouched down. "It's a special Lego set, but I need to talk to you first." "Can I come in for just a few minutes?" "No," I said, pulling Kyle closer. "You need to leave." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please. Just one more minute." "You don't understand. Please, let me give him this gift." Kyle tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, please, it's Legos." But I saw the wild, desperate look in her eyes. Something wasn't right. I reached for my phone to call 911. Before I could, she yanked the screen door so hard the lock snapped. She slapped my phone out of my hand and scooped Kyle up before I could even scream. "Kyle." I bolted after her, but she was already at her car. She threw him in the back seat and hit the locks. "Stop." I pounded on the window. "Don't do this." She started the car and sped off. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my keys, starting mine. I put 911 on speaker and shouted her license plate number to dispatch. "Ma'am, do not engage," the operator said, but I wasn't stopping. I followed her to the children's hospital. She screeched to a stop outside, and I slammed my brakes behind her. I ran after them, screaming, "Someone stop her." Security guards rushed in, chasing her down 2 hallways. Nurses turned to stare as Kelly shouted, "Look through the window. My daughter Misty's in that bed. She's dying, and he's the only match. He can save her." The guards grabbed her arms and pulled her back. I yanked open the back door and grabbed Kyle. He collapsed into my arms, trembling and crying. "Why did the doctor take me, Mom?" he sobbed. I tried to answer, but no sound came out. My throat burned, my chest felt hollow. Kelly was still screaming, pointing toward the hospital, shouting about her dying daughter. She actually thought what she did was okay, like stealing my child was justified because hers was sick. More guards ran in, forming a wall between us and her. Someone called the police over the radio. I held Kyle close, walking toward the hospital doors. My legs felt weak and heavy, but I didn't stop. Inside the hospital lobby, I found a chair tucked into a corner, far from the windows. I sat down and pulled Kyle onto my lap. My hands were trembling as I checked him over his arms, his legs, under his shirt, searching for any scratches or bruises. He kept whispering that he was fine, but I couldn't stop looking. A nurse in blue scrubs came over carrying 2 bottles of water and a blanket. She wrapped the blanket gently around Kyle's shoulders and spoke in that soft, careful tone people use with someone fragile. That's when it hit me. We probably looked as wrecked as I felt. Kyle was still sniffling, and the bottle in my hand rattled against the chair arm from how bad I was shaking. About 10 minutes later, 2 police officers walked in through the main doors. Their hands rested on their belts as they scanned the lobby. One of them came over and asked if I was the woman who'd called 911. I nodded, and he told me they needed to separate us for statements. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to let go of Kyle, but he said a hospital social worker would stay with him in a nearby family room. He pointed to a woman standing beside a door decorated with cartoon stickers. Inside, I could see shelves of books and toys. I carried Kyle over, and the social worker greeted him kindly, showing him a basket full of action figures. He glanced up at me, and I promised I'd be right outside. The officer led me to a small office and handed me a clipboard full of forms. My fingers shook so much I could barely hold the pen. The words on the page blurred together. He noticed and quietly offered to write for me while I talked. I nodded, relieved, because I wasn't sure I could even form proper letters. I told him everything, starting from the first appointment when Dr. Kelly asked me to leave the room. Then about the strange questions she'd asked Kyle, about home life, his schedule, our family. I told him about the second visit, the Spider-Man coloring book, the offer to come to our house, and the calls that wouldn't stop after I blocked her number. Then how she showed up 3 weeks later and broke through our screen door, grabbed Kyle, and sped off. My voice steadied as I focused on the facts instead of the fear. The officer photographed the scrapes on my palms from pounding on her car window and wrote down the plate number I'd given to dispatch. Then he said detectives would take over because it was now a kidnapping case. That word, kidnapping, hit me like a slap. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a frightening doctor anymore. This was a crime. Through the office window, I saw her, Dr. Kelly, sitting on the other side of the lobby, talking to police. She kept pointing toward the upper floors, where her daughter must have been. A man in a suit approached the guards and started talking fast. Through the glass, I caught fragments. Unauthorized patient contact, immediate suspension. Hearing that made me feel a little less crazy. Maybe I wasn't wrong all those times I felt something was off. A detective in plain clothes knocked on the door and stepped in. He introduced himself as Detective Nathaniel Maggi. He asked if Kyle could be examined by a different pediatrician to document any injuries or trauma. I signed the release form, my pen clattering against the clipboard. I told him I wanted to be there the entire time. He said that was fine. We walked into an exam room where Kyle sat with the social worker. A gray-haired doctor came in, her presence calm and kind. She smiled at Kyle and spoke to him gently as she listened to his heart. He clutched my hand the whole time. She noted his heartbeat was racing, signs of acute stress, but no physical harm. Detective Maggi returned after the exam. He explained that Dr. Kelly would likely face kidnapping and assault charges for breaking into our home, and possibly more once they gathered evidence. He said we'd need to come to the station tomorrow to give recorded statements, but could go home tonight if we felt safe. Safe. The word almost made me laugh. I didn't know if I'd ever feel that way again. But Kyle needed his bed, his things, something familiar, so I nodded. While we were still in the exam room, my phone rang. It was Darren. His voice was tight, panicked. A neighbor had seen the police at our house. I tried to explain everything in short bursts, my throat raw. Detective Maggi stood nearby, watching me with quiet sympathy. I told Darren about the chase, the hospital, and what Kelly had done. He said he was leaving work immediately to meet us. Then I mentioned how she'd once offered to make house calls. Darren's tone shifted from scared to angry. "Why didn't you tell me that sooner?" he asked. Heat flushed my face, but I was too drained to argue. Before we could leave, a woman entered the lobby wearing an ID badge that said Child Protective Services. She introduced herself as Genesis Wise. She explained softly that their office had been notified because of Dr. Kelly's earlier assessments. Those questions about our home life had triggered a report. My stomach dropped again. After everything that happened, now I had to prove I was a good mother too. Genesis said she needed to schedule a home visit for tomorrow afternoon. She promised it was standard procedure, not an accusation. But there was something in her tone, a trace of concern, like she thought maybe I should have seen it coming. Driving home felt like moving through fog. Carl sat quietly in the back seat, and every car that turned when I turned made my heart race until it passed by. When we reached our driveway, I saw the screen door hanging crooked, the frame bent. My hands started shaking again just looking at it. Darren had covered it with cardboard and duct tape, which somehow made it feel even worse, like a house broken into and never fully repaired. Darren opened the door before we reached it, scooping Kyle into his arms. I could see all the questions in his eyes, but I was too drained to explain more than I had on the phone. Kyle ran inside to check his toys. I just stood there numb. About 20 minutes later, a police officer arrived to photograph the broken frame and collect my phone from the bushes. He labeled everything like evidence, handed me a case number, and said Detective Maji would follow up tomorrow. When he left, I stared at that patched-up doorway, realizing she'd stood right there just hours ago. That night, Kyle woke up screaming twice, once saying the doctor was taking him, then later crying about being in the car. I held him through both nightmares, whispering he was safe. He finally fell into deep sleep around 3 a.m., but I couldn't. Every noise in the house made me jump. I kept my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over 911. My mind replayed the sound of the car door slamming, her grabbing him, his face in the window. At 8 a.m., Detective Maji called. He said we'd need to come in at 2 for official statements and warned me not to post about it online. The hospital had launched its own investigation, though it didn't feel like enough. How had no one seen this coming? Kyle came downstairs asking for cereal, and while he ate, I wrote everything I could remember, the appointments, the questions, the way she studied our lives like she was planning something. The Spider-Man coloring book. The offer to come to our house. She hadn't been helping him. She'd been learning us. Watching us. I'd felt that unease every time but convinced myself I was overreacting because she was a doctor. And I was just a mother who didn't trust her gut soon enough. I should have trusted my instincts and walked away after that first strange assessment. At the police station, Detective Maji guided me through filing for an emergency restraining order. The forms asked for every incident and date, so I wrote everything: the broken door, the abduction attempt, her boundary-crossing house call offer, even the calls after I blocked her. Kyle stayed in a separate waiting room with a victim advocate who had toys and coloring books, thankfully away from what I had to describe. Detective Maji was patient, making sure I included enough detail. He said a judge would likely issue a temporary order by tomorrow. Signing those papers felt both important and pointless. Protection on paper doesn't stop someone who's already broken through your door. Still, I hoped it would at least bring consequences if she tried again. That afternoon, a woman named Deborah Stokes from the hospital's risk management department called. She said Dr. Kelly had been suspended pending investigation. Her tone was careful, professional but nervous. She asked about our appointments, consent forms, and the house call. I could hear her typing as she said the hospital would review its safety and privacy policies. It sounded like damage control, but at least they were taking action. The next day, through Detective Maji, a transplant doctor named Wu Logan contacted me. He explained that legitimate bone marrow donation requires extensive consent, counseling, multiple appointments, and clear understanding from everyone. What Dr. Kelly did was far outside any ethical or legal standard. Even if Kyle had been a match, her methods would have made the sample unusable. Hearing that made me feel both sick and strangely relieved. She could never have actually succeeded. 3 days later, Maji called with new evidence. The lab tested the Spider-Man markers Dr. Kelly gave Kyle. They found traces of saliva on them. She'd coached him into giving a DNA sample without us realizing. That betrayal felt worse than the physical grabbing. She'd turned his trust into a tool. Maji said there would likely be additional charges for unauthorized genetic collection and child endangerment. Later that week, Genesis Wise called with therapy referrals. She found someone with immediate openings, Dr. Sarah Chin, who specialized in medical trauma. When Dr. Chin called, her voice was kind. She said Kyle might regress for a while, nightmares, fear of doctors, separation anxiety, but added gently, kids are resilient when they have support. For the first time in weeks, I actually believed her. Dr. Chin said she'd have toys and art supplies ready for Kyle's first session, that sometimes kids express more through play than words. I was grateful Genesis had connected us so quickly instead of leaving us to figure it out alone. By the weekend, word had spread through our neighborhood and Kyle's school. My phone buzzed nonstop with texts, most kind, offering meals and support. But then came the screenshots from a parents' Facebook group. People were speculating that there'd been abuse in our home, or that Dr. Kelly had reported us. Reading strangers debate our lives made me feel sick and humiliated. I wanted to defend us publicly, but Detective Maji had warned me not to post anything. Darren took my phone, reminding me that the people who mattered knew the truth. Still, it hurt knowing others didn't. That night, after Kyle fell asleep, Darren and I argued in hushed voices in the kitchen. He wanted to sue the hospital right away, said we needed money for therapy and maybe to move somewhere safer. I insisted we focus on the criminal case first, that justice mattered more than a settlement. It escalated until we were both crying, drained and scared, sitting at the table unable to fix anything. We went to bed without speaking, backs turned. The next morning, Genesis arrived for her home visit. She checked every room, asked Kyle gentle questions. Did he feel safe? Did he have his own bed? Did he eat meals? I tried to stay calm as she noted things down, even inspecting the broken door. When she finished, she told me clearly I wasn't under investigation. This was just protocol because of Dr. Kelly's reports. She said my quick response showed I was a protective parent. Hearing that made something inside me finally unclench. Later that day, I took copies of the restraining order to Kyle's school. The principal helped create a safety plan, a password for pickup, a photo of Dr. Kelly for staff, written rules about who could remove Kyle. For the first time, I felt like we had real protection. By Friday, a week after the hospital incident, Detective Maji called. The hospital's attorney wanted to discuss a settlement, policy changes, and compensation for what we'd been through. Darren saw the hospital's settlement offer as proof they knew they were liable, that they'd failed by giving Dr. Kelly so much access to Kyle. I saw it as damage control, a way to bury the story before it got worse. Still, we agreed to hear them out once things calmed down. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from Dr. Kelly's attorney. It expressed remorse under emotional distress, asking us to consider the pain of a mother watching her child die. The words were so calculated, designed to make us feel guilty. My hands shook with anger, but underneath was a flicker of unwanted empathy. I shoved the letter in a drawer, unwilling to look at it again. Detective Maji called soon after. The DA was preparing charges, kidnapping, assault, and multiple HIPAA violations for accessing Kyle's records. He said the prosecutor wanted to meet before filing to explain the process. For the first time, it felt like the system was actually working. That night, I saw a news article about a girl needing a bone marrow transplant. They didn't name Dr. Kelly, but I recognized details from what she'd shouted at the hospital. My heart ached for the child, even as I stayed furious at her mother. Darren saw me reading and closed my laptop, reminding me that compassion didn't mean forgiveness. 2 weeks later, while grocery shopping, a woman approached me in the cereal aisle, Misty's aunt. Her eyes were red from crying as she begged me to let Kyle be tested. I told her she was violating the restraining order, but she kept pleading until a store manager stepped in. I left my cart and sat shaking in my car for 10 minutes before calling Dr. Logan. He calmly explained the real process: cheek swabs, anesthesia, recovery, and said it had to be voluntary and safe. Knowing the facts helped ease the guilt behind my no. Days later, Detective Maji called again. The DNA test Dr. Kelly tried to run was worthless, collected wrong, contaminated, and inadmissible. Even if it had shown a match, no transplant center would have accepted it. She'd terrified my son for nothing. Somehow that made it all feel even worse. I followed Kyle's gaze and saw a woman in a white lab coat walking into the medical building next to the pharmacy. She wasn't even looking at us, but Kyle grabbed my arm and started hyperventilating, crying that the doctor was coming to get him again. I dropped to my knees on the asphalt and held him close, guiding his breathing the way the therapist had taught us, for in, hold, for out. It took nearly 20 minutes before his sobs turned into shaky breaths. I carried him to the car, buckled him in, and called the therapist. She made room for us that afternoon. The session, she gave Kyle a small weighted blue dog to help him feel grounded. He held it the whole way home and slept with it that night. The next evening, Darren came home tense. Over dinner, he admitted his boss had warned him about missing too much work and said we should just accept the hospital's settlement to ease the financial pressure. I understood, but I didn't want to rush or let the hospital escape accountability. We agreed to at least hear their full offer before deciding. 3 days later,